You're watching The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales, streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
Yeah, I realized just the other day that I'm going to be coming up for 10 years doing comic journalism and stuff like that, and videos and whatnot. Yeah, that's when I started at Bleeding Cool. And it's even older if you go back to, I actually started a site called Comic World News back in the early 2000s. But it's been about 10 years straight. And I've noticed a big change. And one of the things I hate are these articles that say stuff like, these 15 things you missed while watching this movie. Or what the ending of this movie really means. It's like, or this ending explained. It's like, isn't that talking down to your audience? Isn't that like saying you're an idiot? You obviously missed these things that they put in the movie, and you obviously can't figure out the ending. It's a good thing we're here to explain it to you. I'm glad I stopped writing for websites. I can just do the show, have a conversation with you guys. It's much better. Stay tuned for the Dan Wickline Show. Hey everybody, welcome to the Dan Wickline Show here on The Experience. It is February 9th. Speaking of Bleeding Cool and years, today is William Christensen's birthday, the founder of Avatar Press and of Bleeding Cool. So happy birthday to William. It's great. I always remember his birthday and send him an email, and he's always amazed that I remember because I haven't talked to him in years, other than to send a birthday message. But how's everybody going? Good to see Cool, Triple B, Werpenstein, Kenneth. Oh, you guys are all here early. Love it. Love it. We have one bit of news to cover before we have a guest who's going to be joining us. But we have one bit of news to cover. And that news has to do with the Sony. Now, I have been harsh on Sony on a lot of stuff. They do a lot of weird things. They are trying to make characters that just seem minor into, carrying their own shows or their own movies. They have Morbius and Craven and Madam Web and El Muerto and Hypno Hustler. These are all projects that they have either out or in the works. But today they announced something that really makes sense. It's probably the smartest thing they have done. They are going to put together a television series following a variant of Spider-Man. So they can actually put out a Spider-Man show that, and they made a deal with Amazon to put it on there. And it's going to be produced by Lord and Miller from the Across the Spider-Verse guys. And Amy Pascal's involved. But it's going to focus on Spider-Man Noir, which I think is absolutely awesome. Now, it's going to be written, executive produced by Oren Uziel from The Lost City. And that's as much as we know about behind the scenes of it. But it's going to follow an older, grizzled Spider-Man in the 1930s New York. This is a character that there's a bunch of people who are listed as co-creators, but including in that is friend of the show, Fabrice Sapolsky. So I'm really excited for this. I think it's a great move by Sony to finally tap into the characters they have. And Spider-Man Noir is different enough that it's not going to confuse people. His costume is different. but it's going to be live action. So will they get Nick Cage to play it? That would be interesting. He does the voice in the animated series. He's not coming back for the new animated Spider-Verse movies because I don't think that character pops up. But it would be interesting since it's supposed to be a grizzled character. Could work, but I think they're probably more likely to go a little younger than Nick. But yeah, Nick would be an interesting choice. But I do love the idea that they're actually going to do that because it gives Amazon a Marvel character, but it also gives Sony, a chance to play with a different version of Spider-Man. And if it works, then maybe they'll start branching out into some of the other Spider characters. Spider-Gwen could get a series or a movie. Punk Rock Spider-Man or Spider-Punk or whatever they call him. Miles Morales, they'll get more confidence once they get this one going. So I think they got the right people involved and they have the right idea. So, and with Amazon is not afraid to throw money at things. If you've noticed, they put a lot of money into the Lord of the Rings to do the follow-up series or the mini series, the prequel series. So if they're willing to do that here, this could be something special. So looking forward to that. Hey, Ed, now it's probably going to take a while to put this together, though, so don't expect it to be popping up like next year. It's probably going to be 2024, 2025 before, well, next year is 2024. It may be either late 2024 or 2025 before we see it at the earliest. So, all right, guys, we have a guest. And for some of you, this isn't going to seem that odd because I do a show every Sunday night with this guy. And then we play it again here on the network, Pop Go the Writers. But we're not talking about, Pop Go the Writers, it's the two of us, and we talk about whatever the current thing is. Today, we're going to talk about his thing, Becky Books, a line of books that he edits and publishes that they're kind of unique. They're more of a deep dive into some of the things that we grew up on, whether it's comics, television, game playing. He's got a few different titles we're going to talk about. So welcome, Jim Beard.
Hey.
How you doing, sir?
Good. And in case your audience isn't aware of it, this qualifies as a slow news day if you have me on.
Now, be fair. I invited you as soon as I knew you were on vacation this week and had the time.
Oh, is that what it is? Oh, okay. And by the way, if you're asking me, I was waiting for the live action Peter Porker Spider-Ham series, so I'm kind of disappointed.
I think they're still trying to train the pig.
Whatever happened to that pig that played Arnold Ziffel on Green Acres? I mean,
he eventually retired. That was a long time ago, Jim.
But what I'm thinking is he probably had kids, right? And these actor families. Just a thought.
Now, see, I was thinking more of the pig from Babe.
Okay, that shows our ages, I think, Dan, yours and mine.
You're not that much older than me.
I say Green Acres, you say Babe.
Yeah, well, I was gonna go Charlotte's Web, but that was animated.
Oh, okay. I got that reference. I understood that reference.
Zuckerman's favorite pig.
I love
Babe's best pig. There you go. Thank you, Werpenstein. I think a live action Spider-Ham could be hilarious.
Wouldn't that be though? Right? I mean, they could, what they could do is animate him and make the rest of the world live action. I mean, we've seen this how many times, how many movies recently. I mean, if they don't do something like that, then I think they're really,
Yeah. But keep John Mulaney as the voice.
Who is it?
The voice for John Mulaney, the comedian.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
He did the voice in the Spider-Verse movie.
Well, they got to do what DC's claiming they're going to do. If somebody plays the animated character, they also play the live action character.
Well, if they do that, then we're getting Nick Cage in Spider-Man Noir, which again I am totally down for. I would love that, and I think Nick Cage would love it too because he's taken some interesting projects.
Well, you know what? He couldn't play Superman, so he might get to play the other popular superhero that begins with an S and ends with man, right?
JD says, "See, I feel that America's infatuation with celebrity has taken away roles from very talented but lesser known pigs."
I okay. I agree with that. Yes.
See, this is what I have to put up with on this show, what we don't have on Popco the Writers.
Thank goodness. Whew. Man, tough crowd.
Actually, I might have to have JD on one night just for the fun of it.
I think that would be fun.
Yeah. So, all right. So why don't you tell us about Becky Books as a publisher first?
Yeah.
How did you, I mean, your background, you used to write for Marvel, you've done comics and prose, and I know that you're doing some current prose, you're posting on Facebook that you're writing Green Hornet. I've been meaning to ask, is that for Moonstone?
Yeah. So Moonstone has the prose rights. As far as I know, they don't have the comic book rights. I think that's still with
Dynamite.
Right, Dynamite, yeah.
Yeah, they just did a one shot called One Night in Bangkok from Shannon Denton.
That's right. Yeah. So 2 years ago, I did a Green Hornet novella for Moonstone for Joe there at Moonstone, and that was, I mean, you talk about bucket list, and that was just an amazing project. It's funny because in my Facebook memories, it keeps coming up that at this very time 2 years ago, I was editing my story before I sent it in to Joe. So that was called How Sweet the Sting. And Joe's asked me a couple times since then if I wanted to write more Green Hornet. And I mean, somebody says to you, do you want to write more Green Hornet? And the answer most people would probably be yes. And here's me. It's like, no, I got so many other things that I want to do. I've already done that, So here I am in another horrible, horrible writing slump. Well, not exactly, but not this week. But Joe came back to me again, and he's like, do you want to write a 10,000 word Green Hornet story? Can I have it maybe by the end of February or maybe into March? And I just said, you know what? Maybe that will kickstart things for me again. I've been doing a lot of nonfiction, which we're going to talk about. But I had my vacation this week, and I literally got up on Monday morning and just said, I'm doing this, and started writing the story. And if all goes well, I might finish it tomorrow. So nice. I'm also writing a brand new Western short story for my other publishing venture called Flinch Books, where we do mostly, pulp fiction stuff. It's one genre I have never, ever worked in, is classic Western. And I'm just having a ball. It's so fun. So I'm trading back and forth. I write my Green Hornet chapter, and then I write my Western chapter. And then I do that every day. I'm averaging about 3,800 words a day, which compared to 0 words a day that I used to do, that's amazing for me. So Becky Books started for the most part last year. It was, and then I've sort of grandfathered in a couple of self-published books that already done, but it's named after my late wife. Becky passed away in July of 2019. And since that time, I have been looking for ways to honor her. She was the biggest book person I've ever known. She just loved books. And she was a writer herself and a musician. And so it just seemed to be perfect. I didn't have a name for the things that I did all by myself beyond Flinch Books. And I just said, okay, it's Becky Books, and got a logo designed, and then just really went to town on it. In 2018, I did a book, and I didn't send you this cover, but I did a book called The Joy of Joe.
Okay.
which the subtitle is Memories of America's Movable Fighting Man from Today's Grown-Up Kids. And the whole idea of this book was that, number one, I'm a huge G.I. Joe fan, classic G.I. Joe, the 12-inch G.I. Joes from the 60s and the 70s. And I said, I want to have a nonfiction book about G.I. Joe, but I want to do it differently. I want it to stand out a little bit. I don't want it to be a price guide or a history of the toy or anything like that. And I said, I really want to talk about how freaking fun it was to play with that toy as a kid, because that really hits home with me. So I went out and I found a whole bunch of writers who all had the same experience as me. But the trick was here that they did it all at different times. So I got guys that had the military G.I. Joe in the 60s. They had the adventure team G.I. Joe that I had in the 70s. And then guys who came in 1982 with the little G.I. Joes and up into the 90s. And so every essay in the book is their childhood experiences of playing with G.I. Joe. And we just had a ball. I mean, everybody got it immediately, what we were trying to do. And we just had a blast doing it. Kind of flash forward to last year, and one of the things that Becky and I talked about after I did that book was that we wanted to do a book about Dark Shadows, the 1966 to 1971 supernatural soap opera, and because she was just an immense Dark Shadows fan. After classic Star Trek, that was her favorite show. Well, it didn't happen. And that was in the back of my mind for a while until finally last year I said, you know what, I got to do this book. And I thought it was the perfect book to finally put the Becky Books logo on and kind of kickstart that whole thing. So as I was doing it, I said, well, you know what? I want to do that same thing that I did with Joy of Joe, which was, hey, let's get people who were kids during that original run, 66 to 71, and do that same thing. Talk about being a kid and the joy of sitting down, or rather running home to sit down to watch that show. The title comes from something that Becky always used to say to me, was that she ran home from school to watch that show. And for many years, I thought that was unique to her until I got on the internet and on Facebook, and more I started to see people saying that same phrase. I ran home from school. And I remember that day that I turned to her and I said, it seems to me that you weren't the only one who ran over. I said, it's like some kind of a thing. And so that stuck in my head, and that provided the title of Running Home to Shadows. And that's the through line through that whole book is, I was that kid. I got off the school bus, or I was so close to school, to home from school, that I ran. And that's just another book, just like Joy of Joe, that just almost came together on its own. And lo and behold, I got Catherine Lee Scott to write the foreword to it. And for those in the know, she played, among many other characters, she played Maggie Evans on the show, and is still one of the biggest proponents for the show, spokeswoman for that show, along with Lara Parker, who played Angelique. And she's just one sweetheart of a lady. I know somebody who knows her. He put me into contact with her. I explained what I was doing, that it was dedicated to, my wife. And she said, absolutely. And she just wrote this really, really nice forward for that book. But what I did is I said, oh, you know what? I should use that same kind of subtitle. So it's Running Home to Shadows, Memories of TV's First Supernatural Soap from Today's Grown-Up Kids. And before I knew it, I realized that a series had been born. So 2 books, and then also then late last year was Running Home to Shadows, or Rising Sun reruns is now the third official book in the series.
Nice. Now, before we go any further,
Yeah.
We never talked about the creation of Becky books before. I put the book back up, JD. Either one. Looking at the logo, you mentioned that Becky was also a musician.
Yeah.
Is that why it looks like there's a bass clef and two musical notes in the design?
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. I just have the most wonderful designer and formatter that I work with named Maggie Ryle. She is someone that we work with at Flinch Books. She's actually a good friend and former co-worker of my Flinch Books partner, John Bruning. And she started doing also my books and now all the Becky books. I asked her to design the logo, and she got it immediately at what I was after. I even drew a little crude sketch, and I said, like, if you could kind of make it look like musical notes, and she came back with that, and it was just perfect. I'm so glad that you recognize and realize what I was going for there. Yeah. And inside of Running Home to Shadows is Catherine Lee Scott does the forward, and then I write the introduction. And basically what I did in the introduction is I told her story, everything that I could remember that she told me about watching the show. So she's not here to tell her story, so I got to do that for her. And then at the very end of the introduction is actually a photo of her right around the time she would have been watching the show.
Nice. Now, for those who don't know what Dark Shadows is, this was basically late 60s, early 70s?
Yeah, 66 to 71, right?
Right. It was a soap opera, like a standard soap opera, except with the supernatural. It was, Barnabas Collins, I believe, is the main character, or is a vampire. Now they did a modern version of it with Johnny Depp, but I didn't have the same feel.
No, in fact, they kind of almost made that movie a comedy. It's so weird because that's Tim Burton directed it, and Johnny Depp was the one that pushed that project through. And he just went on and on in interviews and whatever else, saying how huge of a fan he was. And then he makes a comedy out of it, and it just died. It practically died right out of the gate. It wasn't really what anybody wanted. The sad thing is that he actually had cameos from the 3 or 4 of the surviving stars. One of them, who is now passed away, was Jonathan Frid, who played Barnabas. And I think it's like the very last thing he ever did. And sadly enough, it was this unfortunately bad Dark Shadows movie. But the significance of Dark Shadows is that it popularized the idea of a sympathetic vampire. There had been, vampires in fiction, some that weren't necessarily all bad, but Barnabas Collins he started off in the show as a villain. He then became an anti-hero, and then he morphed into a hero. There's this, real interesting arc to him in that show. He became a heartthrob to millions of females across the country, across the world, and it was all because of the sympathy that he inspired in viewers. And if we have sympathetic vampires in fiction today, it's because of him and that character. But this was an amazing show. It was a gothic, except it was set in present day, what the present day was back then. But it introduced all these incredible things. I mean, it had witches and werewolves and Satanists. There's one whole storyline that's basically ripped right off from H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. I mean, this was weird, heady stuff for a daytime soap opera that was on 5 days a week week after week after week. I mean, you had housewives watching, a version of Turn of the Screw. You had, housewives watching these warlocks rising the demons of hell up in episodes. It was just amazing stuff. And a lot of those storylines are talked about in my book, because all of the writers all had their own favorite storylines and characters, and they really talk about them in the book.
Now, and correct me if I'm wrong, didn't they also try to revive the series with Ben Cross as one of the villains?
Yeah, that was in the 90s, and I was really surprised because Becky wasn't a real huge fan of revivals and redos and things like that. We watched Star Trek: The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, but classic Trek was so near and dear to her heart that she kind of only half-heartedly watched them. She did want to watch the Ben Cross, and it was basically a mini series. It was at nighttime, and it was a mini series. And strangely enough, she actually really liked the Ben Cross series. And if you're a Dark Shadows fan and you've never watched it, I would kind of urge you to go ahead and seek it out. The cast in it is just amazing. It had Gene Simmons as the head of the family, and I don't mean the guy from
the actress, not the
actress. I think it's the male head of the family was played by Roy Thinnis, who was the lead in the TV show The Invaders. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of who played Julia Hoffman. Oh, Barbara Steele, who is well known from Hammer horror films. There's shooting so many of those. And then Ben Cross was Barnabas in it.
He was still well known for Chariots of Fire.
Yeah, yes, very much so. And then weirdly enough, after the turn of the millennium, there was an announcement that Dan Curtis, the creator of Dark Shadows, was trying it again. They actually filmed a pilot to relaunch the show, and it was something about they didn't even get through filming. They actually killed it in the middle of filming. I think you can look on YouTube and there might actually be footage from it. I can't swear to that. I never watched it and Becky never watched it. So I don't really know what the value of it, but it couldn't have been too good if it was actually killed before it was even, born. When news of the Johnny Depp show or movie came out, she was a little apprehensive, but because she was not a Johnny Depp fan. She could never be mistaken for a Johnny Depp fan. And she said, you know what? She said, I think we should go and see it. And we saw the first trailer, and it was practically slapstick. And she said, nope, don't want to see it. Don't need to see it. And we were very glad that we didn't go and see it.
We need to take not on Top of the Writers, but here we take commercial breaks. So we're going to take a quick break. We will come back and we'll talk about Red Sun reruns.
Did you know that every Experience show, including some exclusive content, streams on Twitch? Check it out. Twitch.tv/the_EXP. Or just scan that QR code.
You just finished the last episode of your favorite news show, and you just have to talk about it. But all your friends are ghosting you because of that incident last week at the buffet. Oh, you know the one. What you did to that chowder. Ugh. Keeps me up at night. So what do? Join writer Dan Wickline as he breaks down all your favorite pop culture media. Whether it's a review of the latest nerdy TV show or a dive back into the history of your favorite comic characters, Dan's ready to discuss all the hottest topics live. Join the conversation as Dan live streams Tuesday through Thursday at 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. The Dan Wickline Show on The Experience. Comic culture and sales.
There's something for every imagination at your local comic shop. Visit comicshoplocator.com to find a store near you.
Programming on the EXP is made possible by viewers like you, or your local comic shop, or that Kickstarter you backed, or the publisher you like, or comic industry professionals who want to share a message with the world. Really, anyone who wants to advertise with us can. If you're interested in seeing a product you know and love, or are creating, or are publishing, or are involved with, advertised here on The Experience, and having your message shared with our viewers, please reach out by scanning the QR code below or visiting our website and using the contact form.
Hello, I'm Declan Shelby. I'm the artist of Old Dog from Image Comics. I'm the writer, artist, colorist, profiler, admirer, but anyway, I'm running out of silly things to say. But you can get this at issue 1 is out now, and of this new ongoing series, you can get it at Space Cadets, and you can catch me on The Experience.
You know, we don't normally run the ad for the Dan Wickline Show during this show. But that said, it reminds me of just how the delivery is on the line, "What you did to that chowder" is so good. That's JD, our producer, did that ad, and just such a good delivery on that line. All right, we are now going to talk about Red Sun reruns.
Rising Sun reruns.
Rising Sun reruns.
Come on, do your research, Dan.
I keep wanting to call it Red Sun Rising. So
that's because you're a Superman fan.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly, yeah. So now, what shows did you cover with this?
Like just about everything. I'm a huge Ultraman fan, and so glad to be able to say that in the early 70s, I got to watch it on TV here in the United States in a dubbed version, and just loved it. In fact, I didn't get to see it as much as I would really have wanted to. But boy, we cover so many shows. So the idea is the same. A bunch of writers got together and they all talked about all of these great Japanese imported shows that we had here in the West over many years, from the 60s all the way up to the 90s. So we talk about Ultraman, we talk about Speed Racer, we talk about Johnny Sacco and his flying robot, we talk about Kimba the White Lion, Battle of the Planets, Robotech, Voltron, all the way up to the final essay in the book is actually about Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. I wanted to make sure that I included that in it. So basically any of those great Japanese shows that we got over here, whether live action or anime, I know what kind of a chord those hit with the people who love science fiction and fantasy and all of that. There's even a couple of surprises in this book. We actually talk about the Japanese Spider-Man TV series. I had one of my good friends, John S. Drew, who is Mr. Podcaster Supreme, and that he and I are currently doing a new Doctor Who podcast together. He actually contacted me when I was looking for writers for this book, and he goes, "Hey, I want to talk about the Japanese Spider-Man." And I said, "Well, John, that's cool and all, but it has to be shows that were actually, shown here." I mean, I knew about that show. And he's like, "Oh, no, when I lived in New York, when I was a kid, I watched it on a Korean TV station that we were able to get in there." I'm like, "What?" you actually got to watch this show? And he goes, yeah, and it was still in like Japanese or whatever, but I kind of figured I knew what was going on. And I said, dude, write that essay. So that is so much fun, the way he describes that show and the weird way that he had to watch it. I also had another good friend who's in a lot of my books, Alan J. Porter, who is actually from England but lives in the States now.
Mhm.
He watched a Japanese show called The Water Margin in England. And he starts to tell me about it, and I'm like, just do it. I said, this is going to be such a nice surprise when you're going through this book, and you might recognize the shows, but then you're also going to get some shows that you might never have heard of or seen, and maybe you're going to go, want to seek them out. But yeah, I mean, there's a few other ones, but I won't go into the whole list because I want people to dig into this and have some fun with it.
Yeah, we've had Alan on the show actually when he
Okay.
had his James Bond lexicon come out.
Yes. Yeah. He is Mr. James Bond.
Yes. Yeah, I've known Alan for quite a few years. So yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, he really is, and I look forward to. I mean, he's been in. He's in my Batman 66 books, and he's in the G.I. Joe book, and he's in Rising Sun reruns. As far as I remember, I don't think he's in the Dark Shadows book, and I'm sure he'll be in more because I will always take an essay from him.
Nice. So you said you also have books on Batman 66. How many books do you have on that?
3 in the series, and each one is for a different season of the show. Batman 66 was 3 seasons, and those are at a very basic level episode guides where every writer took an episode, but it's way more than that. It's that they took a hook, and that's how they dig into each episode. They're approaching it from some unique perspective, some unique way, so it's not just another episode guide to the show. Like some of them are, they pick out an actor maybe and talk about them more to kind of get into the show. John Bruning did that with the Michael Rennie episode, second season, where he plays the Sandman, and it's a Sandman and Catwoman one. He really digs into Michael Rennie as an actor, and what an amazing thing it was that he ended up on Batman of all things. But then we had some people who would take like a character in one of the episodes and write it as that character. We have an essay about the Mad Hatter episode called "The Contaminated Cowl," where it's the infamous one where Batman's mad from radiation.
Yeah.
The writer actually wrote a journal entry from the professor scientist character who's in the middle of that whole episode, and it's all that kind of wonderful stuff. So those are called the Subterranean Blue Grotto essays on Batman 66. And then they each have an individual title. The first one is called Zlonk Zok Zowie. and we're looking at ways right now to expand that series beyond just being those 3 seasons and doing it that way. That's not written in stone yet.
I know that when I was doing I do these psychological profiles on characters, and I did one on the Riddler, and I was amazed to find out just how much of the character of the Riddler really is created more by Frank Gorshin than in the comics.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff we now consider standard for the Riddler was from the things that he did with the character, because the character had only appeared like 3 times.
3 times before the show.
3
times. Twice in the 40s, in the late 40s, and then he disappears until what we call the new look Batman, when Julius Schwartz took over the titles in 64, and I think it's maybe like 65 or so Riddler appears, and that's why he's in the show. Because they had a couple of comics that William Dozier or whoever was looking at, and I think they just assumed that he was a prominent villain. I mean, look, he's right there.
Yeah.
Joker, Penguin, Catwoman, Riddler. But you're absolutely right. I'm in an upcoming nonfiction anthology called The Man Who Laughs, which is a essays on the character of the Joker, published and edited by Rich Hanley, the same guy I did my Planet of the Apes book with. And I said, I have to be the one to represent Cesar Romero in this book. He told me that they're thinking about doing the same sort of book for other Batman villains. And I'm like, oh, please do the Riddler. Please do the Riddler. Because I already know what I'm going to say, which is everything that we have today is because of Frank Gorshin, that he set that character.
Yeah, most is. So there's also,
okay.
I
would say most of it. But you know what? If he hadn't ended up in that show, I'm not so sure that the Riddler would be in that upper pantheon of Bat villains.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't have Paul Dano's version today, or for God's sakes, Jim Carrey's version.
Jim Carrey is totally doing Frank Gorshin with all the pelvic thrusts and everything.
Yep. But even down to the question mark suit and the bowler hat was Gorshin going, I want something else to wear. I don't want to just be in the one unitard all the time.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yep. So, all right, let's go ahead and move on. You have two other books we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Which one would you want to talk about next?
Well, let's continue with the Memories from Grown Up Kids series. So volume 4 is on its way. So that is, and this is a world premiere of the cover. This cover is never been shown before. It's being shown on your show right now for the first time.
JD, D20, please. He may be chasing the cat off his screen.
Okay.
D20 or die.
All right. So this is memories of old school role-playing games from today's grown-up kids. Same idea. Every one of these writers is talking about their childhood memories of playing all those great tabletop role-playing games from 1974 up until about 1987, 88. That's when Dungeons and Dragons actually switched to second edition.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of goes beyond my scope of things. I played, first edition D&D and AD&D. So I really wanted to stay within that time frame. So this is great. And there's a lot of talk about D&D here, but there are so many other games being discussed. We've got things like Traveler, Champions, the Marvel superhero role-playing game, Boot Hill, Villains and Vigilantes. I'm trying to think of, there's so many different more. And I promise, again, a few that are off the beaten path, that maybe only like 10 people ever played before they disappeared. Unfortunately, no one talks about Bunnies and Burrows. I was a little disappointed about that. So I'm going to try to talk about it in my essay in the book.
Nice. Now, who are some of the writers you have lined up for this one?
I knew you were going to do that to me. The funny thing is that there's a lot of writers in this one that I have never worked with before. Wow, that's terrible. You put me on the spot. Okay, right off the head, top of my head, my doppelganger, the guy that's in all of my books because he's just has such a wealth of knowledge and interest, is Frank Schildner. He's in all of the Batman books, and he has been in all of the Memories from Grown Up Kids books, and he's been in a lot of my fiction books too. So he returns for this one. So I'll be announcing the writers list before too long. If everything goes well, I'm hoping that this book will be out by the end of March.
Okay. And now each essay will cover a different game.
No, I didn't want to do it that way. I wanted to give the writers a little bit more freedom from that. But I told them to try to focus on one game, but it was okay to bring up other ones. Again, there's a lot. I mean, I mean, I don't think it's going to surprise anybody. A lot of people played D&D, AD&D.
Right.
That was the gateway drug to role-playing game. There's very few people who started with some other game. We've even got a couple of people in this book who were there pretty much in the beginning. I didn't start playing D&D until 1981 when I was a sophomore in high school. But there's some guys who are playing it in the mid 70s or even late 70s. So there's some really great perspectives from that point.
Nice. Okay. So, and when do you think that one's going to come out? You said
hopefully by the end of March. It's in the editing stages right now. All essays are turned in, and me and my co-editor Forrest Helvey are working our way, finalizing everything. Once that's all done, it's pretty quick from that point on to get the print edition done and the ebook, and then have those up. I will be shouting much more about that on my Facebook page, which is called the Jim Beard and Becky Books page. So if anybody wants the latest on that book and that series, it'll be there. Right now I'm trying to do 2 books in that series a year. So if everything goes well, there'll be a volume 5 in that series by the end of this year. I don't want to announce the theme right now, but I'll just say that we return to the concept of talking about a single legendary TV series. Maybe we'll do one of those every other volume.
Okay, and then the final book you brought a cover for, is one near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, thank you. I like that.
Yeah, and that is The Old Origin Changeth.
Yeah,
so that's the big announcement. Of course, is the foreword.
This is an idea that I've had for so long, and it's finally becoming reality. I mean, I love comic books, and I always have, and there is a lot of books about comic history, comic criticism, all of that out there. And I came up with this idea several years ago that it kind of started as what really hasn't been talked about? What theme within the world of comics hasn't really been gone into? One of the things that's always fascinated me is the march of time. That we are reading and collecting and enjoying characters that are now over 80 years old. That's a lot of time that has gone by, several generations of people. And I almost feel sorry for companies like DC and Marvel, because they're tasked with keeping these characters fresh and relevant to audiences. So this book is about how 6 different concepts, properties, have had their origins updated and changed over the years. So we talk about Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman for DC, and then Captain America, Spider-Man, and the Fantastic Four for Marvel. I reasoned that, of course, the top 3 characters for DC are Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. I don't think anybody could argue that at all. When I started to look at Marvel, I actually started asking around, because I had my own thoughts about who are the biggest properties, who is the equivalent at Marvel to those DC characters. And to me, it really came down to Spider-Man. I don't think anybody could argue that. Captain America, and then that third one was the one that I went back and forth on. And people said, "Oh, it's the Hulk. Oh, it's Iron Man. It's the X-Men." And I said, "You know what? No, I think it's the first family of superheroes. It's the Fantastic Four." So we have an essay on each, and each writer followed the timeline. They begin by talking about the origin as it was originally presented in the comics, and then they start going up through the years and saying, okay, X amount of years later, this was changed about it, or this was embroidered, this part here. Right off the top of my head, Batman's a great example. It always goes back to the death of his parents, but that's a constant that never changes, and it never will change. But they started adding things to it and altering sometimes the tone, sometimes kind of how it occurred. It went back and forth about whether Batman knew who the murderer was. It used to be that he didn't. And then it was Joe Chill. And then he found out that somebody hired Joe Chill. And then we get up to 0 Hour, and they took that away from him. He didn't know who the killer was at all. And now that's back again. He does know it's Joe Chill. And it's like, why is that? Why did that change through the year? And I thankfully, we have this guy right over here. This one. Wait, I can't do this right, Dan. There we go. This guy writing about Dan.
I got to write about Captain America, and I was really surprised because I found the reasons things changed to be almost as interesting as what changed. And I think they're kind of unique to the character, because the purpose of Captain America in the 60s or in the 30s and the 40s was very different than the purpose of him when they brought him back in the 60s.
Yeah.
So, the little things changed in the actual origin, but how it was presented, and the fact that it was written by Joe Simon and drawn by Jack Kirby in the 40s, and then redone by Stan Lee and Jack in the 60s, but it feels very different. The whole purpose of it is very different. Yeah. And I found that to be absolutely fascinating. And it did lead to what the whole theme of the paper ended up being, was the purpose of the character and how he fit in then to where he is now. And but I would think that the other characters had very different reasons for their changes, probably a lot more story driven.
Yeah. And that's what this book is all about, digging into it, talking about those major changes through the decades, and some speculation as to why or what was going on at the time. Going back to the Batman one, there's some changes as far as adding characters in to who came up to Bruce after the murders. Alfred didn't come into the story until years later. Dr. Leslie Tompkins didn't come into the story until years later. It just seemed like, he just picked himself up. He was like, an 11, 12-year-old kid, and then just got on with his life and went to school and then dedicated his life to fighting crime, and that was that. And then they decided, no, he had to have a couple mentors in there at some point. Things changed as far as when relevancy came into comics. And they said, no, there has to be a little bit more realistic about what happens. I'll tell you, the one thing about that time and what was going on changed the most is the Fantastic Four. That origin story is about getting into space first. It's the old space race story. Well, once you get past 1969 and landing on the moon, you can't keep doing that. It can't be, here in 2023, it can't be that Reed Richards wanted to be the first guy in space, right? It can't be that he and Ben Grimm fought in World War II. That just doesn't work anymore. So the reasons behind why Reed went into space have changed multiple times. And the essay really, follows that. If everything goes well, again, that book should be out. It may not be March because I'm trying to get D20 out, but it could be March and it might be April. By the spring, both those books should be out. Really, really, really excited. about
Well, if you
that.
have it out by like April 29th, that'd be great because that's my birthday. And
Okay, you got it.
Birthday,
You got it. You know what I usually do? I usually pick a date of the next show that I'm going to be appearing at, so I can have something really, really new at my table. Which I don't know if that's the greatest reason in the world, but all right, you got it. I'm saying right here in public. I'll make sure you can have that book by your birthday.
I have to say that I really had fun writing this essay. I haven't done a lot of nonfiction essays on comics. I mean, I've done articles and I did the psychology essays I do, but actually looking at it, and as I dug more and more into it, it really was fascinating. And I can't wait to read the other story in the book, because it's like, this is what I found. Like I said, I'm just blown away by how much the story changed. The whole origin got redrawn by the same artist.
I love that
so differently, and why it's done is so I'm really curious some of the changes and stuff like that. And we got just a minute left. Yeah. Was there anything you see? So you've read the whole book because you've edited it. Was there one thing that really stuck out at you as the big surprise?
I going back to the Fantastic Four, and it's because I read that one more recently. I think it was the last one in. Again, how many times that reason behind the flight was changed and embroidered and updated, sometimes even reversed back to maybe like one creator before. And then it's almost as if anytime somebody takes over the book, they have to meddle with that thing again. And whether or not it's from editorial direction or that somebody just wants to play with it. But I was kind of surprised how many times that was changed, because as big of an FF fan that I am, I don't think I realized that.
Well, thank you for inviting me to do the book, and you got me hooked now. I want to write more of these things. So
okay. All right. Well, you know what? If people like this book, we might go on. We might do Iron Man, X-Men, and some of the other DC characters, Flash, Green Lantern, Hawkman. People gotta let me know if they enjoy these books, if they want to see more.
All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up for us. Coming up next is What's in the Box with Jenna. Is going to be digging a box out of the warehouse, seeing what's in it, and putting it up for sale. We got Space Cadets, and we've got Sketch Up with Mog and Mel Park tonight with their guest, Don Walker. So you want to stick around for all of that. Jim will be back with me on Sunday for Pop Go the Writers. Are we going to finally do the Star Wars conversation?
I'll never tell.
Unless a big news story comes up.
Yeah, please.
Jim and I will be talking about.
Come up, please.
Jim has been promising me that we're going to talk about the Star Wars sequels and why they're not as bad as I think they are.
Talk about, not argue about. We're just going to talk like adults about it. Right?
All right. So Stick around, everybody. We will see you on Sunday. Stay tuned for lesser shows. Have a good night.
See ya.
Do you remember what it was like when you were a little kid and you got a letter in the mail? Now imagine that letter was filled with information about your favorite shows, pop culture questions, links to things you're going to want to see later, and even sneak peeks at upcoming programming here on The Experience. That's what the EXP mailing list is. Every week, we send you sneak peeks, information, and all of the relevant links for all of the shows you want to see. Sign up now on our website or scan the QR code that's on your screen right now.